This is Hunting Fields by Dr. Peter Colla, Chapter 11, A Seed is Planted, narrated by the hooded vigilante. A seed is planted. In the dark arts, there's only one way you can advance to the higher ranks, and that is if you are selected. Selection is based on two qualifiers, birth and potential. Advancement comes at a cost. If you wish to have your name added to the Black Book, a sacrifice must be made. Firstborn children are preferred, and innocent women second. A child must be groomed from its earliest awareness, inserting the images of parents that fall within the desired outcomes of a system they have been selected to participate in. The lone black phone without a dial on its face rings on a quiet and uncluttered corner of a desk in a library office. Startled at the sudden ringing of the phone, after more than a few pauses, a well-dressed Italian man reaches for the phone and lifts the receiver to his ear. His hand shakes as he ponders this. With his own surprised look on his face, he is rarely afraid of anything. He doesn't say hello, only listens quietly, staring out as the instructions are presented to his ear. A stern yet clearly Germanic voice can be heard, stating commands to a man who now is paying the most reverent attention. The only sign of emotion is the occasional biting down of his jaw and the firing of the muscles all the way up into his temple of his head, as a contemplation of not only what is being told him, but by whom it is presented. I understand is the only response as he slowly places the phone back into the receiver. Not writing anything down or looking in any particular direction in the dark room, except staring straight ahead as he stands there in his office, dressed in the finest handmade silk suit, business clothes, a pinstripe suit, and a collared pressed white fine Italian shirt. He is just getting ready to go out on the evening into his real work. The call broke, and he thought of that today, or the business he feels may be more important for him or his family. Even as the thought of family distracts his eyes, his thoughts race between the two families he has. One, the family of his wife and children, the images he displays to them, and the second, his real family, the men he has devoted his life to, the small legion of power, the system that he was born into as primo, chosen by birth to lead. It is this system he has dedicated his heart and soul to completely. And when it calls, requires something, even a sacrifice, he has no choice but to obey. The tension is finally broken by Pietro, suddenly taking a few steps to the makeshift bar he has next to the desk and pours himself nearly a 3/4 glass of whiskey without ice, quickly drinks it down, and pours another glass as he sits down, almost exhausted, in the leather chair behind the desk. He quickly starts writing things down on the back of a business card at his desk. Firstborn sacrifice, glue, birthday 12/12/60. He looks at his own writing with almost a tear forming in his eye as he realizes the sacrifice has fallen upon his family, his firstborn grandson. He places his own head in his hands as he tries to rub the headache that has now erupted across his forehead as he thinks of the implications of needing to sacrifice a child within his own household. His own wife never understood the Italian intricacies of Costa Nostra, who or what we really are. Americans foolishly think they understand the mafia because of what they saw in some movie. How can they, when actors like James Cagney, Edward G. Robbins, or even Brando playing these roles share about as much Italian heritage as the ketchup they they call pasta sauce in American Italian restaurants. They never understand the very word mafia or mafioso really means swagger. It's not about what you do, but how and the image when doing it. He always knew this day would come. Every man who wishes to be made has to formalize the soul's contract oath taken with a blood sacrifice. But if you want to move up from soldier into leadership, the oath, the sacrifice, and getting your name added to the book is absolute and usually means a firstborn sacrifice somewhere in your family. You never know when that day will come or who it will be that is selected to be sacrificed. Could be a child, an elderly person, a young girl, or even a prized animal in some cases. But one thing is for sure, you never know who or what until the day and the call comes. At this point, you have no choice. Either consent or you're out to face the consequences. It wouldn't just be him, but they would kill his entire family in front of him and then kill him slowly and painfully last after watching it in front of him. Seventh son bloodlines, he writes down. Last thing, and then drops the pen as he stares at the paper in front of him. 7 times 12. Never saw that coming. He says out loud to himself as he examines the paper he's now holding up in his hand before him. He quickly underlines a point almost in anger as he tosses the pencil down on the desk and then drinks the whiskey with his other hand a bit slower now and glancing first at the business card he wrote on. As he lowers the card to the desk and reaches for the receiver of the other phone on the desk, he picks it up to his ear and dials numbers, even as he thinks about what and where. He's one of the bosses. He dials with steadily increased effort, each round almost adding to his anger. We need to meet. What time can you come? He says to the younger man's voice on the phone. Okay, I will meet you at the theater office in an hour. Come along, Pietro says as he sets the phone down. He drinks the rest of his whiskey in a single gulp, stands up, lifts up the card as he examines it again carefully, then places it in the middle of his pocket of his jacket. He takes a deep breath, pulling out the comb from the same pocket as he slides it through his perfect, slick black hair, adjusts his suit jacket and steps to the door, pulls it open, calls to one of the guys sitting out in the kitchen. Get the car. We're going to town. As the 2 similarly suited young men jump up, put out their cigarettes and hurry out the door to follow the orders, no questions asked. Pietro walks up to the theater's back door. It is dark, but he's never worried, even after dark. He knows these streets. He definitely owns these streets, at least from Jefferson to the Heights, and even a little beyond, from Lake Shore halfway across the state. This is his territory, or at least it will be for sure when this whole business is finished. His driver standing back at the car is watching, even though wearing black sunglasses at night. If anything was to happen, he'd be on it so fast. One of Big Joe's boys, a good kid. Just as he's pulling on the lock and the damp, swollen door of the old theater, another car pulls up and screeches to stop as he's hurrying probably a little too much to get there on time. His son Pete jumps out and dashes to join them. Everyone calls him Little Petey. A few of the older guys call him Sneaky Pete, not just because he's smaller and a little skinny, but because he's fast as a cat. The boy always had a knack for getting out of a tricky situation faster than he got into it. He has already made quite a name for himself as a silent assassin. What's going on? He asks as he quickly leaves the car next to the other one and still running and stepping quickly up to see his father. Inside, we can talk. He pulls one more time on the door before it dislodges from the rotten, swollen wood of the old Wisconsin theater. They both go inside and walk up the stairs to the office, which in this case was not even locked. He opens the door and lets his son go in first, a very unusual consideration of the old man. Rarely demonstrates such a clear act of respect for his son. Sit down, he says, not as much as a usual command, but more of a request. Clearly, this is something out of the usual order, at least something extremely sensitive. He sighs as he pours 2 glasses of whiskey and hands one to his son as he walks around to the seat at the desk. Pietro takes another drink of whiskey and then looks directly at his son and says, he's not going to make it. The unborn child, number 12, a sacrifice is going to be made. Pete takes a big drink of his whiskey, still in shock. He looks at his father, almost in tears, and says, wait a minute. How do they know it's even going to be a boy? How the hell do I know? But they know this stuff. Why my boy? I'm not even made yet, the son says in his shocking voice, stuttering a little, not really understanding what he was asking or hearing. The father picks up his own glass and looks into the crystal, almost trying to make sense of the liquid inside, asking for the crystal ball knowledge he doesn't expect to see. La familia, it's family. You know the sacrifices needing to be made. We don't get to choose. Most of the time we just sit back and do as we're told. You will definitely get your stripes. You'll be a made man immediately after this, maybe soon getting a territory of your own. But one thing is for sure, you'll never have to worry about anything again. This is going to kill my wife. How do I explain it to her? Drinking his own whiskey now between questions. She won't need to know. You will not be at the birth. They already have chosen another child that will be switched from another family. They do this all the time. Seeing the confusion in his son's face, a little bit of drugs for the pain, either her or the baby. She won't even know it is alive or stillborn. Your wife will have this other child given to her and she will never know it. This is family business. You know the rules. We don't talk about family business even with our wives. You will show up at the hospital after it's all done. Why? Now confused and maybe already slurring words for just a little from the whiskey. If we're just getting another child, why sacrifice mine? I don't know. It's all about numeric stuff, having to do with birth dates and everything, family lines, I'm guessing. They don't tell me except they mention the 7th son and bloodlines. Another pause and he drinks the rest of the drink, then stands up and approaches his son with perhaps the first compassionate look his whole life. It goes all the way back to that old world stuff, the father says as he gets up to walk again, thinking, I was your age when I first learned the family business rules. What happens to my child? His son asks with a bit of chill in his voice. How are they going to do it? That's one thing I wouldn't tell you even if I knew, Pietro says, lifting his son to his feet. Today I'm a boss, one day you might be too. If that day ever comes, your questions will be answered. And on that same day, you will know why I couldn't tell you more today. You will take this other child and raise him as your own. When it's time, they will come for him. You must never tell him this to anyone, even your wife. His voice now becomes sober, somber, and almost filled with a hint of fear. They know this stuff. I don't know how they know, but they always know. No matter what, you must never tell anyone about this, especially the child. The father says, now impressing upon him the urgency of everything involved. Everyone as well. He can't be in the family business. They will let you know what their plans are. They will occasionally contact you for any special instruction. That's it. Do you understand? Yes. Now it is the son who's rubbing his own throbbing head at his temples. Good. Now go home and remember what when the time comes, you get stuck at work and don't go to the hospital till it's all done. Congratulations, son. You're going to be a made man. As for potential, or the specific task everyone plays in this created world, the major issues of the dark arts, regardless of their best efforts, studying signs, stars, physical traits, even manipulating the living and the dead, they cannot effectively predict the future. Thus, they must control any candidate they deem worthy of advancement, for it is only through their voluntary participation, consent, and approval any measure of success in the system can be achieved. And remember one crucial thing: if you wish to move into the higher levels of leadership or success in the dark side, a firstborn sacrifice will be required, either directly or indirectly from you. Pushing the heavy, old-fashioned manual mower fast and then into the grass over a foot tall of weeds and even more hidden rocks below was so hard, especially since the mower only seemed to cut in about a few inches before coming to an abrupt halt. Then you have to pull it back, shove it again, making the prospect of cutting this huge yard with almost knee-high grass and weeds something that should only take an hour, at this rate, a whole day. And the $5 I'm going to get for it, the task seems almost fruitless. Growing up in a modest environment, plus living on what most people consider the south side of the tracks of any town, does play with a young boy's mind as he meanders through his youth, seeing others enjoy many of the simple luxuries like snack food in a lunchbox when he carries a brown paper sack and had to make do with a single pair of shoes for the whole school year. If you happen to make the school team, the only thing they need us to get is the particular color of basketball shoes to match the rest. But this was only possible if if that color happened to match the off-brand sold at the local department store Kmart, and it didn't. This left the young boy with a perplexing task of either cutting the neighbor's 2 feet high grass with dad's old push mower, $5, to collect the $35 necessary to buy the prized shoes, or look like a Smurf wearing the goofy canvas white high tops while everyone else wears suede gold and black. So when I walked into the house hoping my dad would let me use the gas mower, just to see him sitting and talking with Grandpa Pietro from Wisconsin, I had to say I was a bit shocked, since I might have seen my grandpa maybe once or twice my entire life. Come and say hi to your grandpa, my father says, as he turns from the discussion he seems to be having at the dining room table. This is cousin Nicky. He works with your grandfather. Looking back at the other man, sitting also wearing a suit, holding both glasses of whiskey, my father says, holding his own, which is really strange since I never saw him drink anything except coffee my entire life. They dropped by on the way to Vegas, my father said as he smiled and turned back to the men. As I step up to greet my grandfather, who holds out his hand to shake, his eyes are kind but sharp. He looks at me with a smile on his face. Sit down, my cousin Nicky says. I shake his hand as well, but the confusion must have been written all over my face. I didn't even know I had a cousin. Actually, he's the son of my cousin, Sonny, from Chicago. Your great-grandmother's brother, Joe, my uncle, my grandfather says as he smiles, lifting his drink. Familia, all the men at the table lift their glasses almost in unison and take a drink of the whiskey. Here, try it, my father says. He hands me the glass, and I take a little drink of the liquor with only one large ice cube. I cough once. The men at the laugh at the moment. My grandfather doesn't. He just sits silently watching me with the same smile. Nicky runs a few of my small restaurants his family owns in Wisconsin, Milwaukee. My father adds, as they seem to get back to business, your grandfather's supper club is opening up an operation in Vegas. He's going up to help them open it. I'm going up with them to help them work on it there. What's that I wanted to ask you? That's what I wanted to ask you. I just remembered. Can I use the power mower to cut the neighborhood grass for my basketball gear? I said to my father. To push the mower won't cut the weeds if they're higher than my foot. It's not working, my father said. I've had a chance to fix it, so unless you can maybe get some new plugs or drain the engine, you're going to have to use the push one. Get what you need, my grandfather says, pulling out a 1-inch thick wad of money out of his pocket, and with a flick of his thumb peels off a couple of $100 notes. He shoves them into my hand without looking at them. In our family, there are better ways to make money than pushing a mower. Why don't you come up this summer and I'll put you to work in one of my restaurants to teach you to be a short order cook, Cousin Nicky suggests. When you come back, you can get a job inside, out of the heat. The other men laugh, seeing how Nicky is uncomfortable in the Arizona heat, especially in the suit. Sweat runs down his forehead faster. He can wipe it off with the handkerchief. I'd like that, but I'm barely 14. I'm not old enough to get a job yet, I don't think. All three men just laughed. Yeah, well, if it's okay with my dad, I'd love to. Hey, if that's what you want, my dad says, as soon as school is over, we will put you on a bus and send you up. It would be just like going and joining the army. Yeah, except in this army, you don't get taxed on your pay, Nicky says, as they all laugh, including me, except I had no idea what they were talking about. After a long bus ride all the way back to Milwaukee, Wisconsin from Phoenix, my grandfather was there to pick me up. We are going to drop your bags at my house. I've got to get some stuff for a meeting I have this afternoon. He says as his driver starts to put my bags in the car and then opens the back seat for my grandfather as I climb in on the other side. I still haven't figured out where you're going to be staying. Your cousin Nicky, or with your aunt? She's got kids your age, or with your great grandmother, he says with a smile. Don't worry, I won't dump you at grandma's. She's sweet, but that place and all those old women drive me crazy every time I spend more than an hour there. Dropping by my grandfather's house was truly a quick in and out. We walked in and said, help yourself to anything you want to eat, marching in and down the hall to get what he needed. The house was a huge luxury condo that seemed to be a very expensive part of town. The whole house was shaded by heavy curtains, which made it look more like night, even though it was the middle of the day. It was immaculate, not a single item out of place. Pictures, flowers, artwork on the walls, everything looked like it had been perfectly placed to fit exactly the house instead of the house fitting the person who lived there. Every pillow was so neat and orderly, and the house looked like it was a model home or something off a movie set. I was hungry since the last night we were driving on the bus and hadn't eaten anything yet this morning. But when I opened my grandfather's refrigerator, other than a huge jar of olives, a shelf full of bottles of Bavarian beer that I'd never heard of, and a single bottle of vodka. The only other things was a door full of condiments. And other than that, there was not a single thing to eat. Most of the refrigerator looked like the rest of the kitchen, as if it had never been used. I don't eat here much, as you probably noticed, he says behind me as I turn embarrassed to see him looking. My job keeps me up most of the night, and usually I sleep during the day, but especially in the mornings. Let's go get something to eat, he says as he takes a short drive to an old brick building and restaurant I recognized by the name my father told me growing up was where he worked. We walked in through the back door right past the kitchen. As he briefly stops at a large office in the back, dropping off a leather briefcase on the desk, unlocking the door as we exit into the restaurant. The dark, beautiful, furnished old brick restaurant seemed to be open only for us. This is my restaurant up here. It's called the Supper Club, he said as a young, beautiful waitress puts a couple of folded napkins and silverware in front of us. They don't open till the evenings, but Laura here will get one of the cooks to make us something to eat. So what do you feel like? She asks him a couple of questions in Italian, and he answers likewise. I'm getting veal parmesan with pasta, he said as he looked at me. Just a burger is fine, I said as I pulled out my comb and slid it through my hair a couple of times. The wind was quite brisk outside walking up, but mainly wanted to look good seeing the young, beautiful women at the bar. Your father did it always that way with his hair. It's a family trait, my grandfather said as he pulled out his own comb and ran it through his perfectly styled hair, just like me, with a smile. A few more instructions in Italian, and I was a bit surprised how the girl just jumped to go tell the cook about the food. I looked around and I saw a few beautiful women all running around in short black cocktail waitress outfits, high heels, nylons, but other than a couple of other women just starting to stock the bar, there was nobody else in the place. As I looked closer, nobody seemed to even speak English. They all spoke to each other in some language that I couldn't even understand. While the servers, we hire servers, even cooks from the old country here. It is part of the charm, he says to me as he smiles looking at them. A couple of these girls are part of the associated family back in Sicily, not cousins exactly. Let's just call them true or pure bloodlines, he says as he looks back at me looking at the girls. Oh, by the way, I'd rather you not call me grandpa around anyone, especially the girls. To everyone else, I'm your cousin Pietro. A lot of people around here call me Big Pete, he said with a smile. This seemed really strange since he was smaller than I am. But the thing about the girls, I did understand my grandfather had a reputation for being a bit of a ladies' man. Maybe it had something to do with him being married at least 6 times. But even my father had to admit those were only the ones he knew about. It could have been well over a dozen by now. I looked around at the dark restaurant standing off to the side. I saw the large driver of my grandfather's car. I must have looked at him sitting again with confused look. Oh, that's Frankie, he says, noticing my look. I don't like to drive in the bright of days. Hurts my eyes. So he drives for me, he said as he unfolded the napkin and set his silverware exactly straight in front of him, then adjusting it a couple times until they were perfectly straight. Good kid. So what he does, just drive you around? I asked, a bit confused, looking at the large man now talking with one of the waitresses leaning over his table. No, he's one of my managers, he says, as a different cocktail waitress brings us 2 glasses of bourbon on ice. Let's just say he's kind of like a lieutenant, if this was an army. She smiles at me as I get a little embarrassed and look away. My grandfather just seems to watch me and hardly notice the girls. She was probably not older than 18, but to this young skinny boy of 14, every girl older than him already looked like a woman. And very few hardly ever noticed him, and none ever smiled at him, especially like that. I look back at her as she continues to smile, saying something soft in Italian to me I didn't even begin to understand. My grandfather looks at me with a smile, talking to him and pushing my drink a bit closer to me as he continues. He actually works for the same club your father did when he used to live up here. I took I took a quick gulp, still looking at the girl as she turned away, glancing over her shoulder at me as she went. This time I made sure I didn't cough. My head started immediately to spin. I shook my head briefly and came to my senses. I thought my father worked for Apex Carpet Cleaning, I said after the moment, a little confused at my grandfather's response, who now had a perplexed look on his own face, his eyes moving as he tried to remember, and then just said, "Oh, you're right. I think that was the job before that one. You were probably too young to remember," he said as he lifted the glass, looking for the crystal as he always did. I looked around for my comb. I think I might have dropped it on the floor. As I looked back at the long-legged woman now stepping slowly away, looking over her shoulder as she walked. I don't remember girls from school ever looking so womanly as this one did, and ever looking back at me. The crystal glass reflected with the pulsing lights of rainbow colors, and the song in the background playing was very familiar in my head. Started making me feel like I was waking up or falling asleep. He just sat there and adjusted his seat, crossing his legs, taking a large drink from his glass, as he for the moment turned his attention to the young woman walking away in her short black skirt, high heels and long legs, in perfect motion as the music playing in the shadows. I thought I heard something, as if it was in the world between sleep and awake. Did I nod off to sleep for a moment? All I heard him saying was, "I'm going to take you over to your great grandmother's before I bring you to Nick's." And then the voice softly saying from the shadow, "You're old enough to consent. All you have to do is say yes." That too was wrong because before he worked at Apex, he worked at GM, the GM plant, nighttime security, which he spoke to me quite often when I was young. I thought to myself, maybe did I dream it? I hear a bell sound in the distance and I suddenly wake up just to hear the last line of the song. Feed your hair, feed your hair. Change of plans, my grandfather says, stepping up to the table as he pulls out his wad of money and carves out a couple of 20s for the waitress. "Nikki, looks like we have more pressing business back in Chicago. For the time being, Paul, you're going to go to be staying with your great grandmother after all." "What about my cooking job?" I said, looking myself a bit confused when Nikki showed up. "I don't have any money to even get to the bus." Thinking to myself, even if I wanted to, I couldn't manage any place I wanted to go, let alone my age even being able to get in. "Here, put this in your pocket." He hands me a wad of money he was holding. "That should hold you over until I get back. Grandma drives you crazy. Your mother told me to let you stay at your Aunt Marion's. She wanted you to come stay with her if this stuff here fell through." The whole way, my grandfather hardly said a word to me and just kept looking and sometimes smiled. By the time we made it to the great grandmother's retirement home apartment, he broke the silence and said, as we walked up to the apartment, "You keep that business we had back there at the restaurant between us. In our family, the men don't talk about business of men with women, even family, and never outside the family with anyone. Capiche?" "Absolutely. I mean, yes, sir," I said, my head still spinning at exactly what I did or didn't exactly see. I had no intention of telling anyone, even if I could remember. "You're a good kid," he said as he walked looking straight ahead. "Your father tells me you're interested in getting in the academies, a general, huh? That's a good choice." I just nodded, wondering when I had even mentioned to my father or my mother my interest in the military academies. I was in the Army, World War II, corporal logistics. Supply never left the mainland. He paused for a moment, staring forward, and then walked down to the long corridor. There is something special about you. He took my arm for a moment, a serious yet sad look on his face, almost like he was thinking about what he wanted to say next, and smiled. You're destined for great things, much more than this family or my path could ever give you. Don't be like me, he said. Choose good, even when it's hard. We turned the corner as we stepped into her apartment. The smell of fresh Italian cooking was unmistakable. My mother, your great-grandmother, is a sweet woman, but hard-headed. She doesn't take no for an answer. Don't let her rope you into one of those penny poker games with those old friends of hers. Before you know it, your bus money will be all gone, he said with a smile, reaching for the door. I can only walk you up, then I have to leave. Frankie will bring the bags up by later. He pulls open the door as the rush of Italian pasta smell hits me like waves. The small apartment was filled with pictures, knickknacks, and jammed with furniture, hardly leaving room to walk, but the kitchen took up half of it. I looked at my great-grandmother standing there in her all-black mourning clothes. She looked more like a nun than a great-grandmother. Immediately, my great-grandmother comments in half Italian about his mother still wearing all black and mourning her youngest son, Steve. We read this. Immediately, my grandfather comments in half Italian about his mother still wearing all black and mourning her youngest son, Steve. She bursts out in Italian, wailing, picking up the picture from the mantle, full of baby pictures about how handsome he was. Then immediately downshifts, settling the picture on a small table set for dinner, and grabs me. My little Petey. She gives me a big, wet grandma kiss on the cheek. I certainly remember that. And a few other words, I still have no idea what they mean. You should have respect for your brother. He's a war hero, she said, looking again at the picture. It was 10 years ago, he said. I think you should lose the shroud by now. He said with a bit of a smile, kissed her again, and walked over to the large pan of pasta sauce on the stove, pulled off a chunk of bread and dipped it in and tasted it. We must have seen that inquisitional look as he leans over to me and softly says, car accident. The worst day of my life, she says, moving the picture in the middle of the table. The day my Stevie died, oh, my baby. Pointing to one of the many baby pictures in the middle of the mantel. This is your father. This one is Pietro. This, she says, looking back at my grandfather with a quick frown. Jimmy, Bobby, Frankie, Tony. This one I don't remember his name. He's Mary's boy. Tommy, my grandfather said, as he starts opening the other pots on the stove and started looking for more bread. Tommy, yes, God rest his soul, she said as she makes the sign of the cross quickly on her forehead and pulls me further along to the parade. He's a war hero. My grandfather mouthed the word car accident with a smile as he silently went back to his search. Every baby picture looked like the same kid. I recognized my brother, Anthony, until I saw my picture. I looked like a plucked, tow-headed little bird among all these chubby kids. Everyone had black hair standing straight up like monkeys. Why do you only have the boys' pictures? Don't ask, I heard my grandfather say as he lifted the spaghetti sauce lid again. And my great-grandmother started wailing again. My poor Pietro, your great-grandfather. I love him so much, she cried as she pulled out a picture of him standing maybe 2 or 3 years old. Good gravy, Ma, Grandpa said, looking at the table for dinner, now with a black and white picture of his brother right in the middle. But we just ate. I've got to go. I didn't eat, I thought to myself as I remembered the uneaten burgers still at the restaurant. I was 12 when I came to this country with only the picture in my pocket, she said as she looked affectionately at her then husband to be. You are 12 of Pietro. You are the 12 of Pietro, she said to me as she looked at me. You have to call your son Pietro. It is tradizione. We find you a good Siciliana girl. Leave the kid alone, Ma. He's just 15, he says as he opens the uncorked bottle of Chianti and pours himself a tall glass, then goes on to pour one for me as well. You were 11, Ma. You had me when you were 12. That it was the worst day of my life when my Pedro died. Look, she looked up at her for the second time and realized what she said. He was a war hero. I softly said to my grandfather as I looked back, car accident? He just shrugged with a smile and put his glass on the table. She didn't seem to hear as she took the pan of spaghetti noodles and started piling them on 2 plates on the table before us, then pushed him out of the way as she took each of the plates and scooped a couple of large ladles of sauce on each. She looked at me as he lifted a huge meatball, and I just nodded in agreement, then piled 3 more on the plate. You boys need an eat, she said, as she set the plate on the table across from each other, then grabbed me again and kissed my cheek with another big grandma kiss, a bit too big for my late liking. You such a big boy, little Petey, she said with a smile. You skinny like your father, eat, she says with a smirk as she pushes me into the plastic-covered metal chair, maybe older than she was. Ma, I have to go, my grandfather says as he kisses her cheek and turns to put his brother's picture back on the mantle. What do you know like, she says, handing in shock, standing there, face facing the pile of food, mustering all the sad guilt she can manage. See what I mean? He looks at me with a smile and winks as he turns and just nods his goodbye to me, kisses his mother again, and then out the door. And that was the last time I ever saw my grandfather. After dinner, I walked into the little bedroom. Frankie deposited my bags before I even finished my first plate. Grandma called me after into the bedroom to see if I had some change. Her friends are coming over to play poker. I reached into my pocket. Remember, Grandpa gave me some money. I pulled out the wad that was at least an inch thick, folded of hundreds, with only 2 or 3 20s, over $4,000. My first thought was, did he maybe give this to me, maybe by mistake, thinking they were all 20s? I noticed a single weathered white business card that must have slid in between the bills in the pocket. On the back was a faded scribble, which looked like my father's handwriting. My birthday, 12/12/60, the word primogenito, and the numbers 12 times 7 with a line crossed under it or through it. The only other thing that somebody scribbled that looked like the words Cosa Nostra. This was almost as strange as the entire day with my grandfather, or should I call it with my cousin Pietro. I thought to myself with a smile, again, not really remembering when or why I thought that. Then I heard a strange mechanical doorbell sound. I thought about throwing the card away, but then I decided to put it in my own wallet and slide the business card back in behind my school ID. The cash was too thick folding, and I put a rubber band around it, and with a single flip of my thumb peeled off a $20 bill for the poker game, shoving the rest in my pocket. I turned to go play cards with my grandmother, and as I walked into the room, I was shocked to see 2 dark-haired Italian-looking women in short skirts and high heels sitting on the couch smoking cigarettes looking at me. These are girls. They show you around. They speak no good English. But she said with a smile, you know, like? My grandmother said, standing there looking at me with a smile. That was chapter 11. Hunting fields. A seed is planted. This is the Hooded Vigilante. Till tomorrow. Bye.